Why aren't Gen 6 SSDs a thing yet? Welcome back to the Raid Room, the video series where we take a subject in the world of data storage and pull it apart at the seams. No B-roll, no cuts, we just get to the nitty gritty. Over the last year, close to 2 years now, we've actually seen brands like Samsung, we've seen Phison, we've seen Silicon Motion, we have seen multiple brands start revealing their Gen 6 SSDs in development, and much like hard drives, going out to data centers and more. Fast forward now to almost halfway through 2026, and they're nowhere. Even though even last year at Computex at their Phison stand, they were showing off their Gen 6 controller, they're still nowhere. And I think there are some users, despite AI sucking the air out of the room, that are wondering, why on earth aren't Gen 6 SSDs a thing? So let's get the obvious one out the way. No one needs it. I mean, again, we will go into more detail, but I think let's call it a spade here. We aren't making the most of Gen 5 SSDs right now for multiple reasons. We look at a Gen 5 SSD. Gen 5 SSDs right now, even though the controllers are there and the NAND is getting better, they're just, the amount of throughput they are promoting with Gen 5 SSDs, we've seen some starting to arrive now at 14 gigabytes per second performance. Read, of course, and we'll come back to that in a bit. The result is that when you get into the write territory, you might get 10 to 12 gigabytes per second write for a certain period of time. And even when Gen 5s were started to become more consumer available, it already became abundantly clear that heavy writes didn't last for very long before the onboard cache got oversaturated and suddenly massive performance drop. If you introduce a Gen 6 SSD that effectively doubles and a little bit more some of that performance, the result is that drive's going to get filled up even quicker, and the work and the activity that's going into controllers and NAND and cache on these drives to do a better job of facilitating and providing that full speed without throttling for as long as possible is probably better served on Gen 5 SSDs when we really aren't doing anything to maximize the promised somewhere between 25 to 30 gigabytes per second read performance. There's actually a potential maximum bandwidth of 32 gigabytes per second on Gen 6, but much like Gen 4 doesn't fully saturate 8 gigabytes per second, and Gen 5 doesn't fully saturate 16 gigabytes per second, Gen 6 SSDs are almost certainly going to sit somewhere between 25 to 30. But again, that's just read. Because write on these drives, even though Gen 5 controllers are starting to be pioneered by all of the brands I mentioned in the introduction, the development of NAND, where the data actually lives, and the development of the DRAM, the cache on these drives, has likewise only scaled up incrementally. The result is that not only, as mentioned, would a Gen 5 SSD, Gen 6 SSD get its cache oversaturated even quicker, but the differential between read and write is going to be cataclysmic. A Gen 5 SSD right now, the very best of the best we have ever seen, is 14 gigabytes per second read and 12 gigabytes per second write, and that was the Samsung 9100 8TB. But Gen 6 SSDs are more likely going to sit with their write capping at around 14 to maximum 16 gigabytes per second based on current trends, with their read again sitting at 25 to 30. That disparity is enormous between read and write, and it's just another reason why Gen 6 SSDs are not that much of an appealing proposition. And then, as alluded to in the introduction, and what I swear is 1 in every 3 videos on the channel, the shortages in SSDs right now is horrific. AI needing as many of these as possible, chip manufacturers having huge backlogs of orders to fulfill, and even hard drives not filling the gap has resulted in lots of people actually going back a step to Gen 4 rather than settling on Gen 5, because Gen 5 SSDs are getting bought up and stocked up as quick as possible. So right now, Gen 6, there just isn't the market for it yet, and nowhere is that more clear than in motherboard manufacture, because you have this cat and mouse game with most hardware. If we look at Wi-Fi 7 and MLO, we did a video about this and about a video about the testing that Ratings, that Canadian company, did about the true abilities of MLO and the way they're being marketed. And it turned out that MLO was not being provided in the way that it was sort of being advertised. MLO, multi-link operation, is when you've got multiple connections Wi-Fi'd all at the same time on different frequency bands, and different blocks, and ultimately combining all of that performance. But it was being treated more like load balancing when things are being channeled 1, 1, 1, rather than aggregated together all at the same time. And now we're starting to see, years after Wi-Fi 7 and MLO being revealed, that true clients that support MLO, like the UniFi AirWire, for full multi-radio and multi-link simultaneously being conducted, are now becoming available, but very expensively. Now, the reason I bring it up in Gen 6 is Gen 6 SSDs, there is no point in them existing until Gen 6 motherboards are a thing. But Gen 6 motherboards aren't going to do this until clients are a thing. And Gen 6 motherboards will be absurdly expensive. I'm sure Gen 6 workstation, or even workstations, server class huge arrays at data center level, those servers that are going to be running Gen 6 capabilities are going to be almost unpriceable, I imagine, in conventional terms. And once you combine that in with the fact that these systems currently, none of them are showing conventional M.2. They are all showing E1S, which is the more modular, hot swappable and thermal controlled variation of standard PCIe M.2 architecture. Shows you just how much heat is going to be generated by Gen 6, something we'd already known. But at Gen 5, when we move from Gen 4 into Gen 5, Gen 4 was, you probably need a heatsink. Gen 5 was, you need a heatsink. Gen 6 sounds like you need so much cooling. You need water cooling. You need a full coverage dissipation layer on the storage drive itself before it even gets into the infrastructure of the client system and CPU and everything else that's got to manage this data flow. There's just no demand for it when Gen 5 is only, it hasn't even reached its full potential. So Gen 6, even though we're seeing what is frankly follies by SSD brands showing off Gen 6 in the last year or two, there just is no market appetite for it. And everything from the integrators on the client hardware level right the way down to the chuffing NAND manufacturers, the desire towards Gen 6 is just not there. I wish all of these SSD brands would just shut the hell up about Gen 6, because the resources that are being diverted into that, frankly, could go into me having a better SSD in my chuffing laptop. But what do you guys think? Let's talk about it more in the comments. I'm sure someone that works deep within the world of SSDs is going to call out some of the points I've made, or maybe even add to some of the ones I've missed out on. Let's talk about it more in the comments. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the Raid Room series, and I'll see you next time.